Hello, welcome to my presentation. My name is Nick Anello, and I am a student in Indiana Tech, and I'm studying information systems. Um, my degree being information systems, I decided to choose the topic of the Linux Foundation for my business, and specifically the aspect I'm covering is going to be the Linux Foundation's contributions to the open source software community. That sounds like a lot. I understand. It is a very technical subject and a very technical company, but I'm trying to explain it into a way that drew me into it initially, this field in general, and also like how I use Linux in my personal life, and how it's contributed to the community I hope to eventually, with my career, break into. Um, so to start off with, I just wanted to. This is the initial slide. The next slide, I'm just gonna go as I go because this is kind of weird. But so the first things first is just an introduction. I wanted to explain the overview of the presentation, which is going to be what is Linux, because I'm sure a lot of you, or if you're watching, well, the person watching this, I'm pretty sure you are, um, may not be familiar with what Linux is. You may have heard of it because you're using a computer right now. I'm not sure what your background is, but I'm going to go over what Linux is specifically. Then I'm going to go over what is open source software, just to give you an overview of what we're dealing with. And then I'm going to go into how the Linux Foundation contributes to both of these, or is related to both of these, and how they contribute to the open source community. So to start off with, on the next slide, you'll see a penguin. The little dumpy penguin is actually the mascot for Linux, which is an operating system much like Windows or Mac, but it's something that you probably don't deal with a lot because it is uh, embedded into things like, I would say, a lot of like smart fridges, smart devices that don't explicitly run Windows or Mac are based in Linux. Um, Linux actually provides the framework for Android, the operating system that's used on cell phones that isn't a Windows phone or an iPhone. Um, the key features of Linux are that it is compact and lightweight, and it is a community project, which means that people that develop for Linux or develop software for Linux are doing so within a community of other developers contributing towards um, the same end goal and for the same base project. It'd be like if every time you make a Word doc, you were contributing to Microsoft as a whole. It's very interesting and it's a very different way of looking at things, and that's basically the basis of open source software, which I'll get into more in a minute. Um, as I said before, it is very lightweight and efficient. It is like the hallmark of it. That's why it's available in things like smart fridges, and it scales all the way up into Teslas. Um, Anyone can contribute to it. That is the key defining feature of it. You can produce anything for it. You can modify any part of it. You can distill any piece of it and add it to something else, which is the hallmark of open source software. And it is maintained by the Linux Foundation, which is spearheaded by the head of the organization and the founder of Linux, Linus Torvalds. Fun fact, it is in 98% of the top 500 fastest supercomputers in the world. So it's a big deal, but it's something that people don't really experience directly, unless you're in this field. Um, oh, my slides froze, sorry. What is open source software in general? Because what it really is it says this software is usable, editable, and openable by anyone, which means that on a deep level, you can modify, view, cut, copy, paste anything you want about an open source file within certain limitations as long as you cite your source, essentially. It's like writing a paper or writing this PowerPoint presentation and accessing like a media library of knowledge. Like I can use and source other pieces of information that I've gathered and from other sources as long as I cite it. That's basically what it means. and it's the opposite of the way Microsoft and Apple operate. For example, have you ever seen someone deeply change the way their Windows 10 looks or works, or has gotten to the source of the code to change something? No, because they've locked it up in a certain way so that you can't modify the base or can't contribute to it unless you're part of Microsoft or unless you're part of Apple. You can't change any piece of it. This is like version control, um, which prevents software from being directly developed by outsiders. And this is the opposite, and this is the big reason why open source software works. Um, and this is why it's important, which brings us to the next slide. Major impacts of open source software and why it's important um, are that it reduces software cost, it improves diversity and scale. Collaboration is innovation, and that allows everyone to collaborate on the project, and the division of labor changes. And what this really means, I'll go through it piece by piece, is being able to reference other programs, being able to reference code in a community base, being able to reach out to other members of a community of coders for help and information, and even like adding them to projects for the base of something is what reduces software costs, because we're contributing on projects that are, I wouldn't say free, because they are backed by the Linux Foundation. That's why it's important. There's a lot of third-party investment into these things. There's a lot of companies that leave their sources codes open so that other people contribute and make things extensible, like plugins. Like you might have a plugin on your web browser right now to view this in a better way. But by doing this, it reduces the software cost, and it does that by the scale of it. Normally, when you develop software, it requires, let's say, 10 excellent programmers versus 100. And what this does is, because by controlling the number of programmers, you control the number of not only errors, but you also control the number of differentiation in the code. This is getting really complicated. But basically what this means is that if you close it off and don't let people contribute on a community level, you would need to hire many, many, many testers to accommodate many, 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 many programmers. And this would slow you down and cost you more money. The reason why this saves money is because the community can contribute and test things as it's developed, so you can have a wider base of people contributing, and therefore the cost is reduced. And this is on a very technical and company-wide level, but what this means and what this is from on the next slide is actually the Linux Foundation. This is what their goal is. The Linux Foundation provides the basis for the Linux operating system. It provides the kernel, which is the actual base source code, like the little tiny nugget, like the baby that is Linux, without all of its bells and whistles, all the things that make it into Android, all the things that make it into your fridge's smart technology, things like that. It is the base. It controls the base, and it controls the version software of that. So they basically are the ones that have the final say into what gets into the final kernel as it updates. And that's very important on its own. It's basically that they're basically the Microsoft of Linux. But it comes with certain benefits and things that aren't available to Microsoft and Apple owners, and that's really the meat of the entire presentation, is like what it does for the community of developers. As you can see on the next slide, they are responsible for, in different ways than Microsoft and Apple, they're responsible for the implementation of the kernel. As I said before, the kernel is the source of the base of Linux, that is the true Linux experience or the code. They're responsible for keeping track of documentation and keeping track of it. They're responsible for like the licensing for open source documentation. Which is basically they're responsible for the licensing of like how licensing works, like how like, they're like the MLA citation rules of using open source products essentially. And they also provide the standard for the entire platform. On the next slide, I also go into how it contributes to the community, which is the meat of the entire presentation. What the Linux Foundation also provides that Microsoft doesn't explicitly provide, or nor does Apple, is certification. They coordinate all the events surrounding it, and they provide project funding. This is also from their website. It's the main things that they provide. So the Linux Foundation basically creates and constantly innovates their own certification systems and certification learning materials, and it is done in a free, usually, which is very important, and community-based and community-driven way. So you can go on this website and find links to learn certifications, to learn how to get the certification, the source, like every little piece you need to get a certification that can land you a job in like using Linux, all through the website and all through the foundation, which is excellent because it is direct from the source and it is very, very just the way it should be. They also organize all their events. Like, for example, one of the ones that they provide is like the open source consortium, which is one of the ones cited from the website, but it is like, which is like basically like, I think it's held in Vegas, and it is like one of the biggest like open software events in the United States. And they also provide project funding, and they'll even provide funding to contributors who need to travel to those events. Will actually, in some cases, through crowd awareness, they will give them funding to attend the events and contribute. So they're doing a very good job at keeping their brand and also maintaining the use of their paradigm. So they are very good at maintaining themselves, and that's what's so important about them. So in conclusion, what is Linux is the foundation, and the foundation presents it to the world in such a way that anyone can access it, and it is far different than Microsoft or Mac. And I believe it should be the standard, and it should become the standard for software development in general. And that's why it's important. It provides a benchmark for the way software development should be. And that's why it's interesting. So, thank you for your time. This is my test. I don't know if I'll upload this, but you have a great rest of your day.